Hi, I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Brand new Simon & Schuster book all about Michael Bloomberg. Randolph is here with us. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for having me.
Of course. How's everything going?
You know, I mean, the guy had many lives,
Yeah.
so I've been very busy.
You certainly have. And there's obviously a lot to talk about with Michael Bloomberg.
There really is.
You covered him for many, many years. So
Too many.
Too many, right? You're like, can we just end this already? Like,
Yeah,
can we
that's
just call it quits? I mean, it's crazy to think he's almost 80.
Yeah.
And you've been covering him for a long time. So what was it like putting this all together?
Oh, I'm telling you, it was the worst thing. I tell people this: do not write a biography about somebody who's alive, because you know he's still moving. That's why it's the many lives of Michael Bloomberg, because we might have to attach another chapter on the end at some point. You know.
Yeah, and he's still active and still involved.
He's still very active.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people have obviously brought up 2020 and whether or not he would run, but like he's doing his thing kind of in the background. He's getting involved with the whole Jewel thing now. So what's it like for you to see him at this point in his life?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. He wanted to be president of the United States. When he was at Johns Hopkins, he used to, you know, talk to friends, say, are you going to make fun of the first Jewish president of the United States? Or how are you going to say that to the first Jewish president of the United States? He wanted to be. He never wants to be a board member. He wants to be in charge. But I think 2016 was a big lesson for him. They really put together a pretty good campaign for him as an independent. And he decided at the last minute that, not really at the last minute, sorry, he decided that that if he were in that race, he would pull votes away from Hillary Clinton and help elect Donald Trump, and that would be in the first paragraph of his obituary. And he didn't want that. So this time around, I think he decided that that the left had sort of, the progressives had kind of taken over the party, and there wasn't really room for another centrist. He would be more a centrist like Joe Biden.
Well, it's interesting because when Howard Schultz announced his run for the presidency, he kind of got slammed with similar things that Mayor Bloomberg would have dealt with in 2016.
Oh yeah, and Bloomberg really said, you don't want to run as an independent. Yeah. You're gonna, you know, you'll destroy the Democrats if you do that.
Just the way the system is right now, it's just next to impossible for that to happen as an independent.
Yes, yeah. I mean, every state has made it difficult for an independent to be in the primaries and be, well, you can't have primaries.
Right. Was there a time when you covered him as mayor that you thought he would be president?
Actually, no.
No, never?
You know, first of all, he was a very good mayor, I thought, with a few caveats here and there. But he can't give a speech. He's not a good speaker. He gave, there are two speeches that he's given. One, the Democratic National Convention in 2016, he gave a very, very good speech. And then in 2010, he gave a very important speech about the right of a group of Muslims to build a center near Ground Zero. And it was a very important speech, and he said in that speech, you know, what firefighter asked what religion you are as they were saving people from the towers.
That's pretty interesting. For all the speeches he's given his career, really those are the only two that pop out in your mind.
Well, you know, he's said a lot of important things. I mean, and he's written a lot of important things. He's given a lot of speeches at colleges, you know, and they're interesting. But those are the two best speeches that he's given.
Where do you think Mayor Bloomberg has shined the most in his career? Because there's a lot of different lives that you hit on here, and obviously the business sector he's had success in, politically he's had success, but what do you think his greatest impact has been?
You know, I think we're going to watch him now really. He started in 2005 taking on the National Rifle Association, and his advisors told him then, you know, don't do that. You know, first of all, they're so powerful politically, but secondly, all those people have guns. And so, you know, that just encouraged him. And so he really has made an impact there and as you know, funded groups that are fighting for gun control. And then the second, I mean, it all sort of comes under it's health, it's public health that he really cares about, and that's guns. And the climate change issue is now sort of at the top of his list. He's talked about spending $500 million over the next few years to try to get rid of coal-fired power plants and to make sure the air is a little cleaner as we go forward.
Yeah, that would be nice, right?
It'd be nice.
Yeah. It's really interesting because he was in the political game for such a long time, and we always talk about outsiders and their impact, and the NRA has obviously had an impact, but now with his money, he can really make an impact. So how do you think he balances that between a guy that used to be in the game and now is outside the game but still making an impact?
You know, I mean, that's a very good question. I think one of the things I think is really interesting about how he's doling out his money is that after being mayor of New York City, he changed the city in some important ways, but I think the city also changed him and made him realize that mayors are on the ground. They are the people who make a difference in people's lives. And so he's worked to organize mayors and to help mayors, and he really is a pro-city philanthropist, and it's kind of interesting because I don't know if anybody else is doing anything like that.
That's really interesting. So with people like Mayor Bloomberg or people that rise up and are leaders in our society, I'm always interested in, you know, kind of how they got going early on. So you go all the way back to childhood, you go through Johns Hopkins. What fascinates you the most about his journey to where he's ended up?
You know, he started out, when you go back, Joyce Pernick wrote a really good biography, and she talked to people who are no longer with us, but like his mother. And from the beginning, he wanted to run everything. His mother said, you know, he wants to be in charge of everything. And he also, that's the one thing, and the other thing was that he gave a little speech in Medford, Massachusetts, where he lived, and he loved it. He loved being in front of the microphone. He loved, you know, the lights, the attention, all that sort of stuff. And in many ways, he's sort of carried all that forward.
I know you mentioned his sense of humor in here. That's one of the things that will surprise people. What are other parts of his story that not a lot of people know that they'll be surprised to learn about?
Well, I think, one of the things that caught my attention was how, you know, he did not seem to be a religious person. You know, he's not, he's Jewish, but he supported the Lord's Prayer, you know, for people, and sort of attacked all of us in the press for making a big deal about that. But there is a command in the Jewish faith called Tikkun Olam that you're supposed to go out and repair the world. And I think, you know, I think he really holds that close to his heart. And that once I realized that, a lot of other things seem to make sense.
You've covered a lot of really interesting and powerful people here in New York City. Where does Bloomberg rank in terms of the difficulty in covering him, or just the interest in covering somebody like that?
You know, that's a hard question. You know, the thing is, what interested me about him was that we had decided very early on that this was a very boring politician. You know, we'd had Ed Koch.
Right.
I mean, and
quite a different story, right?
And Giuliani, you know, and even, I mean, running against Mark Green, you know, made a splash everywhere he went. This guy was almost splash free, you know. He seemed very dull. And as I began covering him, or, you know, watched him over these years, I decided, you know, maybe he's not as dull as we think.
What's it like for you to watch Bill de Blasio as mayor now, after watching Bloomberg for so many years?
You know, I kept asking Bloomberg what he thought about de Blasio, and it's very interesting. He would never say anything.
Interesting.
You know,
why do you think that is?
Well, I think he decided. I think he decided that that it is not fair for the next mayor to really talk about. The previous mayor to talk about the next mayor. And so he told his people not to, you know, say what they really thought, and you know, you could just see them gritting their teeth, and it must have been very, very, very hard, especially when de Blasio was attacking them. But I think now that de Blasio, it'll be really interesting, now that he's not running for president, he's got 2 years, or 2 years, to enhance his legacy and do some of the things he talked about. And he's been roundly criticized for not going to City Hall and going to the gym and all that sort of stuff. This is time for him to make up.
There's a lot of responsibility that comes with being a New York City mayor. Like, we're not talking about a Cincinnati mayor nationally. So when it comes to New York, what are the specific connections with the mayor in the city that you think people care so much about?
You know, I mean, Bloomberg has always said they care about having their garbage picked up. Yeah. They care about the noise from the place across the street, that sort of thing. And it is true, when you think about the mayor, you think about, whether your street is clean, people think about the MTA when they think about the mayor, but that's mostly the state is supposed to do that. But the mayor also, is supposed to get us ready for another Hurricane Sandy. Right. And so in New York, it's an especially big job because you have all the shoreline. It's a huge job. When I looked at the archives in the city, I realized how much territory there is for the mayor of New York. There are 50 departments. Wow. Almost 300,000 employees. It's a huge, huge job, and Bloomberg wasn't perfect at it, but he sure gave it a whack.
Who was the person you learned the most from when it came to Michael Bloomberg?
Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah. He gave you what you needed?
He did. What he did was, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, told him that, when somebody writes a book about you, you cooperate, because otherwise they only talk to your enemies. So he cooperated, and he didn't see it until it was out. Yeah. But he cooperated, and he told his friends to cooperate.
That makes your job a little easier.
Helped a lot. It helped a lot.
Was there anybody alive that you didn't talk to that you would have liked to talk to?
Yeah, there were a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were people that just didn't, there are people who left Bloomberg LP who've signed these agreements, and they wouldn't talk to me. And so a few people talked to me on deep, meet in the garage background. So.
You mentioned before a few caveats in the overall record. What are a few of the things along the way that he didn't do so great at, or just kind of fell through the cracks a little bit with?
The big one was stop and frisk. I mean, when I mentioned the guns earlier, it was all about the guns, and he and Kelly were trying to get illegal guns off the streets, and that became so much of a priority that they lost track of what they were really doing to a whole community. And when the stop and frisk got to be over 600,000 one year, wow. It was almost everybody in the Black and Hispanic communities had been stopped or felt threatened by being stopped. And I think Bloomberg finally recognized what was going on, but it was very late. And it was after a lawsuit which eventually ruled the New York City system of stop and frisk, or Terry stops they were called, ruled it unconstitutional. So that was the big one. There were also problems with NYCHA, Rikers, the homeless. There's a sort of area that I think Bloomberg, what the Republicans often say is that we offer a hand up, not a handout. Right. And he sort of followed that track.
When people check this book out, there's obviously a lot to take in here, but what are some of the big things you want them to walk away thinking about Michael Bloomberg?
I think if they're New Yorkers, I think New Yorkers should know that, first of all, you want somebody to run the city who knows how to run something. Right. And it might not be a business. It might be a nonprofit or something like that. But you want what he brought to the city was a system of management that I think worked pretty darn well given the broad aspects of this city. And so, I mean, I hope that for people, for when we judge who we elect as president in 2020, you know, who can run the federal government?
Yeah.
You know?
And sometimes it can be different than a business, right?
Certainly a real estate business.
Yeah, certainly a real estate business. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Well, Eleanor, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Really nice
This
to
was
meet
cool.
you. Check out the book, The Many Lives of Michael Bloomberg. It's out now. For Eleanor, I'm DJ. See you next time here on The Sit Down.